The Upper Clearwater Ram Public Land Use Zone is a large tract of protected land within the 1.2 million acre Bighorn Wilderness. It sits between Abraham Lake and the Kiska-Wilson Plews to the north and the Red Deer River and Panther Corners Plews to the south. Its eastern border is shared with both the Siffler Wilderness Area and Banff National Park. In May 2021, Phil and I made our first bike excursion up the Clearwater River from the Cutoff Creek staging area, nabbing Lost Guide Peak before hiking further up trail into Banff to ascend the lowly but scenic Sentry Peak. We were back at it in early June 2022, once again biking and hiking the tremendously long and difficult approach up the Clearwater River through the Bighorn Wilderness and across Banff's eastern border. After dropping the bikes under Lost Guide Peak, we continued 20 kilometers on foot all the way to Trident Lake, where we finally set up camp on its northern shores. The following day, we hiked to the base of the Trident, crossing Martin Creek, the Clearwater River, and Roaring Creek before ascending the easy west slopes of Whimper Peak. After descending back to camp, we hiked up a south drainage of Mount Malloch, following easy south slopes to its 3,099-meter summit, returning to camp for another peaceful evening at Trident Lake. Our exit day was long but largely uneventful as we hiked roughly 20 kilometers back to our bikes before riding over 31 kilometers of challenging terrain back to the Cutoff Creek staging area. We managed to beat incoming storms and arrive without too many fresh injuries, which is a win in my books. It wasn't the dead rabbit lying on the trail near camp with an "oh" look on its face that gave Phil and I pause. It was the dead mouse lying neatly behind it that was strangely off-putting. Both of these corpses were not there 12 hours earlier when we wandered into our lovely camp high above Trident Lake, located way off-grid in Banff National Park. During the night, while we slept comfortably on a bed of moss in the forest, something killed and purposefully placed two dead animals nearby. I had a feeling the next night might not be quite as comfortable as the first one. But of course I'm getting way ahead of myself here. Long before creepy dead animals started appearing near our camp, we found ourselves once again starting out on the bikes from the Cutoff Creek staging area with heavy packs.
There it is.
Up in the first puddle.
There it is.
I cannot stress enough how difficult biking up the series of OHV, horse trails, and roads from Cutoff Creek up the Clearwater River can be. I know everyone can do everything in this day and age of participation medals, but this is next level suffering, especially with an overnight pack on your back. You might wonder about using panniers instead of a pack, but good luck hoisting your bike onto your shoulders and crossing a deep river with this option, or bushwhacking. Put it this way, this trip is among the hardest I've done, and I think that's saying something. After struggling along the always tough and rough North Cutoff Creek Trail, we continued past the South Cutoff Creek Junction and up the Clearwater Trail. The first outfitter camp is located near a peaceful meadow along a small oxbow of the Clearwater River.
Okay.
There's no gauge on the Clearwater, so it's the red.
From the first outfitter camp, there is a newer section of trail that resembles a road more than a simple trail. This road goes up and over a small rise before descending over a bridge and exiting to the always dry Forbidden Creek drainage.
This is Forbidden Creek, right?
Yeah.
Bone dry, eh?
Yeah. That's the big rough right.
The trail deteriorates somewhat along an old cut line where it's muddy and rough, before finally leading to the halfway point of the bike ride at another large horse camp and the 40-mile ranger cabin. From the 40-mile meadows, we knew water levels in the Clearwater River would be higher than they were a year earlier, when we were up here in May rather than June, but we had no idea how high they would be or if we would be turned back by it. After biking the river flats, we managed to cross the Clearwater River along braided channels which felt deeper and faster than the year previous, but not by too much. In a very bad omen as we continued up the trail, the clear water was now running right down the trail as we continued biking right through it. Sure enough, the next channel we encountered along the Clearwater River was simply too deep and too fast to cross safely. Thankfully, Phil had a detour in mind. But I wasn't thanking him for long.
Oh my god. Walk with the book.
We thrashed through stubborn willows before finding a very steep trail up an escarpment over the river. Pushing the bikes up this loose slope under a warm spring sun, I wondered at our stubbornness. What the heck makes us do these things and seemingly never turn back?
Yeah.
Once atop the escarpment, we followed a faint trail along its edge, bushwhacking where the edge had collapsed along with the trail.
This is not Aunt Edna's Sunday afternoon ride.
We happened on a good track that we descended down to a large horse camp back along the main Clearwater Trail.
Yep.
The section of Clearwater Trail between two large horse camps was a pleasant ride in warm sun on a good track. After passing through the largest unoccupied horse camp of the approach, we continued on a good trail towards Harrison Flats. It was nice riding across the expansive Harrison Flats with wild horses grazing in the distance before tackling the horrible cutline under Lost Guide Peak that marks the near end of the long approach ride.
Over. Yep.
After riding gravel flats under Lost Guide Peak, we descended slightly and were happy to finally ditch the two-wheel steeds, hitching them to a nearby tree so they wouldn't wander off without us. It felt wonderful to be walking after many painful hours on the bikes, especially with the big packs. The forest swallowed our footsteps as we hiked past familiar landscapes from the year before. Over the next few hours, we enjoyed the warm sunshine and quiet forest around us as we drank deeply from an early summer wilderness that a long winter had kept hidden.
I remember this bit. We were getting a bit crowded in by the trees.
Yeah.
Wow, isn't that snarl right there?
On the left?
Yeah, that was my original ascent ridge.
Yeah. That's it, okay.
We passed the old Banff boundary marker before crossing the official border at a signed junction.
I think he just walks in the same spot all the time. But I don't understand. I've never seen a bear do that.
Look at that, like he's come here, maybe he's rubbed here and he's turned off over there.
It's just, I don't know.
Come to read the sign.
To me, Phil, this has to be horse. I just expect to see a Timmy's here. Every
I
time.
mean, it's a full-on house, right? Here's the point where you can...
Yeah. Taking longer.
Definitely done worse.
8 kilometers and 2 hours from the bike drop, we were hiking through the oddly manicured grounds of the oddly monikered Indian Head Lodge patrol cabin.
Anybody's home. Stick a pee and then I'll just stop on the other side for a quick drink.
Oh, wow. Oh.
So like...
After crossing a lively Indian Head Creek, we followed a good trail to the Indian Head Pass Junction before continuing towards Malloch Creek.
Pick your poison. Fall on a rusty nail.
Woo.
It's just a big sponge.
Yeah, it's a healthy flow.
Should put down the clear water for tomorrow. So, I mean, I don't think it's crazy.
No.
It's pretty shallow. Be a bit of fun. I'm not sure about it.
No, the other side was basically a no-go, I think.
Yeah.
As we hiked past an old-looking pile of rocks, Phil commented that it might be an old fire pit or something. I walked over to it and was surprised to see a very old survey marker from the 1919 Geographical Survey team. The coolest part of this find was realizing that the very same team that placed the survey marker, with its ominous 7-year imprisonment warning, was the one that first ascended Mount Malloch, looming over it in the distance.
I mean, that at least tells you they're just moving through.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Yep.
From the Malloch Meadows, we made our way steadily towards Trident Lake. Our destination peaks were now featuring prominently on the horizon, and Mount Harris was especially spectacular, looming high over the whole area.
Yeah, there's another creek coming out.
Yeah. That was you walk over to where the exit of the lake is and get a feel for what the crossing is like.
Exactly.
Finally, after 9.5 hours of steady travel from the Cutoff Creek staging area, we arrived at a beautiful random camp high above Trident Lake, with spectacular views to Snarl and Whimper Peak and the mouth of Roaring Creek. We settled in for the evening with plenty of time to rest up and prepare our bodies for another punishing day, ascending largely unknown and rarely visited peaks. As we munched on supper, we observed local wildlife on the lake, including a gaggle of ducks, loons, and a few beavers busy with whatever they do on a casual Friday evening. My tent was set up on 4 inches of soft moss, and I crawled into it early, very happy to put on a podcast and drift off into a deep sleep that such days produce. The evening air was warm, and we were excited to see what the next day would bring. The next day brought rain. That's what the next day brought.
Bit of a misty, rainy morning at Trident Lakes. But, hey, we expected this, so we're going to go for our low peaks first and see what transpires over the day.
As we marched onto the Clearwater Trail leading towards our first river crossing of the day, Phil came up short and exclaimed, "What the heck is that?" Phil often says stuff like this and mutters to himself all the time about stuff, so initially I ignored him. That's when I saw the dead rabbit. It wasn't the dead rabbit that was the puzzle, though. Animals die all the time in the real world. It was the dead mouse lying neatly behind the rabbit on the trail that was a bit concerning. Neither animal had signs of trauma, but both were lying there as if very carefully placed only meters from our tents. Strange, but we had peaks to bag, so we turned around and marched back up the trail, pondering aloud what the heck could be going on here.
But a rabbit and a mouse, both lying dead together, unharmed, untouched otherwise.
Yeah, they've not been mauled there, so you'd think the death has either happened somewhere else.
It implies there's a little mini sour gas well right there.
Ah, well, I know what the answer is. You were farting last night.
Phil's farts is killing the local wildlife.
So that's Martin Creek?
Yeah. We gotta fill it back.
We took in the scenic Martin Creek as it plunged its way from Martin Lake to Trident Lake before arriving at our first unbridged creek crossing of the day and the first of the Spears of the Trident, Martin Creek. The first crossing was very tame, but cold first thing in the morning. Remember, we don't carry water crossing gear, choosing instead to wade across in approach shoes and hike with wet feet. Soon after leaving the Clearwater Trail, we arrived at our second crossing of the morning, this one much deeper, across the Clearwater River. Thankfully, the current was almost non-existent as we waded the crotch-deep waters.
Woo! Woo! I'm going for it. It's good here, Phil.
We exited the Clearwater River onto scenic marsh flats at the south end of Trident Lake, just as the rain let up and the sun started peeking through the clouds. Whimper Peak started showing its summit, and all was good in the world as we made our way along the interesting landscape towards our third and final water crossing of the morning, Roaring Creek.
Like way over there, right?
Yeah, no, this is good.
Two crossings done. What do you think? Here or there?
I'll follow you anywhere.
Roaring Creek didn't look very difficult to cross, and it wasn't, but dang it was bloody cold for some reason. We took a short break after crossing to fill our water bottles for the ascent. As I bent over to fill my bottle, my left knee seized up. I've had knee issues before, but this one worried me a bit. The pain continued as I hobbled my way along, hoping Phil didn't notice. I hadn't come this far to turn around now. We were excited to see the Roaring Creek Falls and started up open slopes just to the north of the creek. The shoulder route worked perfectly, granting us great views of the impressive Roaring Creek Falls below and a direct and mostly bushwhack-free access to the northwest ascent line I'd spotted from camp the evening before.
Yep.
The sneaky line through the lower cliffs on the northwest end of Whimper could not have worked out better. After ascending light forested slopes, we found ourselves on very steep dirt and rocks. It didn't take long, and we were at treeline with wild views up the Roaring Creek Valley. I can't think of a more remote valley in Banff National Park than Roaring Creek, unless maybe its neighbor to the northwest, Martin Creek. This area is not easy to get into, especially on a 3-day trip. Put it this way, it took Rick Collier 5 days to approach and tag Mount Malloch alone from the Icefields Parkway back in 2000, and he was no rookie when it comes to wilderness travel. The mid to upper west ridge of Whimper Peak was even drier than we dared hope it would be. This was likely due to the fact that I carried crampons. If you bring snow gear, you won't need it. If you leave the extra gear behind, you're gonna need it.
Summit of Whimper. Is there a cairn?
4 hours from camp, we found ourselves with no more elevation gains and no obvious cairn either.
Not much of one if there is. FRA. Woo! Check out those views. Summit of Whimper, buddy. FRA, I think. I don't see any cairn. Check out these views.
As we started down west slopes and took in the amazing views up Roaring Creek and Martin Creek, we chatted about the rest of our day. It was becoming obvious that even though the weather was definitely improving, the day was also slipping by quicker than we'd expected. After deciding that we would definitely tackle what was increasingly being referred to as the false summit of Snarl Peak, we looked at a rapidly clearing Mount Malloch across the valley and changed our minds yet again. If you hike and scramble with us, this is something you better get used to. We change our minds a lot.
I think we could even go a little left here.
There runs that. Get the camera out.
We descended our ascent line and hiked down the lower northwest shoulder before hiking out along Roaring Creek, with blue skies overhead and tiny purple primrose wildflowers underfoot. Say that 5 times quick. I was very grateful that my knee was behaving itself, but it was still letting me know it wasn't happy about the situation.
Yeah, Malloch is just getting clearer and clearer and clearer.
A brief stop at Martin Lake on the way back provided a few moments of bliss that almost had us taking a long nap in warm sunshine. We had a quick lunch at camp before heading back on the Clearwater Trail for the south drainage of Mount Malloch. We were in high spirits as we marched past the poor dead rabbits, still looking as confused as ever about their predicament. The mouse had either resurrected during our time on Whimper, or more likely had become part of the entropic cycle of life and was no longer there.
I thought this thing was running.
Robbie and I were trying to think of somewhere to go.
Soon we were dancing up the southeast descent drainage on rocks and boulders, a type of parkour that alpinists get used to pretty quick. Many years ago I was perusing one of the many trip reports from Rick Collier on Bivouac when I came across his ascent of Mount Malloch. He indicated a pretty darn easy ascent, not entirely common for such a lofty and remote peak. One thing I didn't clue into right away was that he took a whopping 5 days to approach, ascend, and exit just this peak. That's a good indicator of just how bloody remote the Trident and Martin Lakes are. It's not like Rick wasn't a veteran of long remote trips and rarely ascended peaks. Sure, he was likely still old school as far as pack weight, heavy boots, and gear goes, but he also did his fair share of pioneering long, fast days in the mountains when very few people were doing such things. In this day and age of extreme athletes socializing exploits covering incredible distances in ridiculously short times, we have normalized things that aren't exactly normal for the average weekend warrior who doesn't have 40 hours a week or sponsorships to dedicate to the mountains. I couldn't believe it when I finally topped out on the ridge proper and saw a continuous snow-free line marching up above me. This afternoon's scramble was turning out even better than expected. Unfortunately for us, we still had hundreds of meters to gain at this point. Malloch isn't the highest peak around this area, but at 3,100 meters it's not tiny.
Buddy! Whew.
Soon we were staring up at the summit block and taking in views of some of Banff's most elusive and rarely seen, never mind climbed, peaks such as Icefall and Mount Eustis.
I feel like that's the summit breeze. Mount Malloch. Wow. Woo!
He may not even left the ridges.
Top deep in the snow.
Watching Phil hike back along the giant scree slopes with Clearwater Lake and Mount Hector and Cataract looming over it all was a highlight moment of the entire trip for me. We are incredibly lucky to enjoy such wild, pristine, and accessible places in a world that is very quickly becoming the very opposite of these things.
Don't go down there, Phil.
That's the fast way.
arrived back in camp less than 5.5 hours after leaving, proving that despite being a few hundred meters higher than Whimper, Malloch is the easier of the two thanks to a much more direct route. Phil and I awoke at 04:45 at our deluxe random campsite overlooking Trident Lake. Weather was forecast to move in for the afternoon, and we wanted to avoid as much of the exit and rain as possible. A bald eagle perched nearby revised our theories on the dead rabbit and mouse near camp, and is the best explanation we've come up with so far. We left camp at 05:57 and made our way steadily down the Clearwater Trail, hiking into the rising sun.
Food or... That's what it used to look like, eh?
Hour after hour ticked by as we came on now familiar sights on the trail. Frost clung to the tiny wildflowers dotting the Malloch meadows, and soon we were crossing Malloch Creek and heading for Indian Head Creek and Lodge. After passing through the Indian Head Lodge grounds, we quickly exited Banff National Park and hiked back through a large horse camp towards our bikes. After 5 hours of steady hiking, we were finally back at the bikes. We could see the clouds boiling up all around and didn't waste any time mounting our trusty two-wheel steeds and continuing up and then down the rough Lost Guide cutline track.
Yep.
Harrison Flats was pure pleasure under a warm morning sun, but we could see at this point already that we would have to be incredibly fortunate to avoid rain or T-storms to the parking lot. We finally arrived at the river bypass section just past the old cabin and gladly pushed our bikes up the trail we'd found on approach. The trail deviated from the Clearwater River, unfortunately, but we managed to thrash our way back to the river without incident and only limited cursing.
Ooh, that looks fierce. We're getting slammed, dude.
The river was a bit deeper and faster than 2 days previous, but we found channels that worked. We got extremely lucky with the ride out from the 40-mile cabin, arriving at the Cutoff Creek staging area without getting hit by any of the storms hovering all around us. When we got back to cell service, we realized just how lucky we'd gotten with the weather. Spot WX was calling for over 115 centimeters of fresh snow on Lost Guide Peak for the following few days. Yikes. This trip was yet another wild adventure in Bighorn country in the Eastern Rockies. This area is a gem for the adventurer who doesn't mind suffering a bit for unique views, wild trails, and solitude in an increasingly busy Rockies landscape. But know that you will suffer for this lonely landscape. Do not take that sentence too lightly at your own peril.